Welcome back to Plato's Republic. We're going to start Book 5 today. If you're just joining us, you probably don't want to start Book 5, you probably want to start Book 1. Check the description, there will be a link to the playlist where you can start in the place where Plato intended you to start. So what do we talk about in Book 4? It began with Glaucon objecting to Socrates' description of the Guardians in his ideal city. And Glaucon said these Guardians don't sound very happy. You're kind of taking away all their private property. You're making them go into battle, taking away all their luxuries. They really don't have like a private personal life of any kind. You know, what's in it for the Guardians exactly? And Socrates says, well, it's not about the Guardians. It's about the whole city. So we're trying to make the whole city function and be as good as it can be. And it's not about one individual class. And, you know, it's not about making the potter as happy as possible, because he would just be drinking wine and eating pastries all the time. So we really want everybody working all the time, being the best that they can be at their profession. And ultimately he goes through these different virtues of the city. We had wisdom, we had courage, we had temperance, and then finally justice. And his definition of justice, which is kind of what we've been getting at this entire book, is that the three classes in the ideal city do not intermingle in any way. So remember, we had the complete guardians, who are kind of the best of the best. We had the auxiliary guardians, who are more of this warrior class, and then we had everybody else. And he says we don't want those guys changing jobs. Between the three classes, even within the class, we don't want the carpenter trying to reinvent himself as a potter. So in the second half, in the last video, we looked at the individual soul. So he said that this ideal city has a parallel in the soul. So if we can, since we found justice in this ideal city, if we look at the individual in this kind of using the same structures, then justice will be the same thing, which is kind of a weird argument, but it's, I guess, proven pretty popular over the last 2,000 years. So he starts to reason about the soul and what the soul must be made of. He says that they're just like this ideal city has three parts, the soul has three parts. You got the rational component, you got the spirited component, or the angry component, and finally you have the appetites. And he makes a lot of different arguments to kind of prove that there are these three things. I don't know what parts of the brain that they actually correspond to. But the end result is he says that the rational part and the spirited part are allies, and they keep the appetites under control. And the appetites are actually happy about that. Like, if you just gave into your appetites all the time, just ate whatever you wanted to, whenever you wanted to, and just did whatever drugs or alcohol you felt like at any time, then ultimately you would be miserable. And so the appetites sort of willingly submit to reason and spiritedness, and just to kind of keep the whole body going. So he says, okay, now we're finally ready to come up with a definition of justice. Now that we have these three components in the individual mirroring the three components in the ideal city, we know what justice in the ideal city is. Therefore, justice in the individual is not having those three things intermix, and essentially having this equal temperament whereby reason and spiritedness control the appetites. He says that's the just person. Anyone who does that, who has reason and spiritedness in charge of their own selves and governing their own life, will be a just person. So he says that kind of person is not someone who's going to cheat you in a contract. That kind of person is going to do the right thing when nobody's looking. That kind of person is going to ultimately be happiest. And it does feel compelling if you just think of somebody who's kind of confident and well-balanced and comfortable with themselves and keeping their appetites under control. You kind of think of that person as maybe they are just. Maybe that is how life ought to be lived. So I don't know. So we'll see where this argument goes. He started enumerating different types of cities. He's like, there are 5 types of city. Here are the first 2. End of chapter. So I think we're going to go at the beginning of Book 5, I think we're going to go through all the other types of cities, and maybe there will be types of... I don't know, there'll be like parallel types of souls. Like, is there a kingship soul? Is there an aristocracy soul? I have no idea, so we'll find out. All right, so that brings us up to the present moment. He says that we found justice, but we're only at starting Book 5, so we're not even halfway through. Is this actually justice? Is there going to be some objections? I don't think we've quite found justice yet. It seemed a little bit. I mean, it took forever, but it still seemed a little bit easy because he's got to talk about something for the rest of the book, and I don't know what there is besides justice. Okay, so Book 5. Let's begin. Socrates' narration continues. Socrates. That, then, is the sort of city and constitution, and the sort of man I call good and correct. And if indeed this one is correct, all the others are bad and mistaken, both as city governments and as ways of organizing the souls of private individuals. The deficient ones fall into 4 kinds. Okay, we've got 4 kinds of deficient souls and governments. Glaucon, what are they? So now Socrates, this is, the italicized stuff is Socrates talking. I was going to describe them in the order in which I thought they developed out of one another. I'm going to look at the note here real quick, see what he means. This task, taken up in Book 8. All right, yeah, we're not anywhere near being finished talking about this. But Polemarchus, who was sitting not far from Adeimantus, extended his hand, gripped the latter's cloak by the shoulder from above, drew Adeimantus toward him, and leaning forward himself, said some things in his ear. We overheard nothing of what he said other than this. Shall we let it go then, or what? Adeimantus, now speaking aloud, certainly not. Socrates, what is it exactly you won't let go? I do like this that Socrates has just been in charge of this conversation from the beginning, except maybe at the very, very beginning, he was kind of held up by Polemarchus, and then Cephalus spoke his bit, but then Socrates has just been, like, powering through this. And now, I do like that there's kind of a secret being held from Socrates, that they're just kind of whispering to each other. And I don't know if it's especially significant, but it does kind of remind me in the first couple of books, we talked about how secret societies and political clubs kind of would tend to undermine our conception of justice. And in this whole ideal city, there don't seem to be there are no secrets and there are no errors. It seems like everything is just as it's described, ideally, and nobody's like, psst, hey, maybe we can get together and screw this guy over. So I don't know. Maybe I'm reading too much into this, but we'll see what this objection is. Okay, Socrates, what is it exactly you won't let go? Adeimantus, you! Why exactly? We think you're being lazy, that you're robbing us of a whole important section of the argument in order to avoid having to explain it. You thought we would not notice when you said, as though it were something inconsequential, that as regards women and children, anyone could see that it will be a case of friends sharing everything in common. yeah, just minor detail. Everyone is sharing women and children. Socrates, but isn't that correct, Adeimantus? Adeimantus, yes it is. But it is just like all the rest we have discussed. Its correctness requires an explanation of how the sharing will be arranged, since there are many ways to bring it about. So, do not omit to tell us about the particular one you have in mind. We've all been waiting for a long time, in the expectation that you would surely discuss how procreation will be handled, how the children that are born will be reared, and the whole subject of what you mean by sharing women and children. You see, we think that this makes a considerable difference, indeed all the difference, to whether a constitution is correct or incorrect. So now that you are beginning to describe another constitution, without having analyzed this matter adequately, we are resolved, as you overheard, not to let you go until you explain all this just as you did the rest. Glaucon, include me too as having a share in this vote. And Thrasymachus said, in fact, you can take it as the resolution of all of us, Socrates. I really think these characters are interchangeable. Thrasymachus, Glaucon, and Edemontus. Okay, so they're saying, yeah, you can't just gloss over the detail that private families are abolished. Okay, Socrates. What a thing to do, attacking me like that. You've started up a huge discussion about the Constitution. It will be like starting from the beginning. I was delighted to think I had already completed its description by this time, and was satisfied to have what I had said earlier be accepted as is. You do not realize what a swarm of arguments you are now stirring up by making this demand. It was because I could see it that I left the topic aside to avoid all the trouble it would cause. I do kind of like this because, as I was reading the last chapter in particular, I was just getting really tired of the argument that just seemed to go on and on and on. And so I like that Socrates is kind of acknowledging that it seems like it's been going on forever. So he's like, oh, no, don't make me explain that. So it's kind of like he's on our side as an impatient reader. Okay, so we're like, now we have to like beg him. It's like, please, tell us more, Socrates. Thrasymachus, what of it? Don't you think these people have come here now to listen to arguments, not to smelt ore? What? Was that a saying back in ancient Greece? I'm not here to smelt ore. I'm here to listen to arguments. A proverbial expression applied to those who neglect the task at hand for an uncertain profit. Thrasymachus is reminding Socrates of his own words. Yeah. I'm not just sitting around smelting ore here. We got serious business to tend to. Socrates. Yes, within moderation at least. Glaucon. But surely it is within moderation, Socrates, for people with any sense to listen to such arguments their whole life long. So never mind about us. Don't you get tired of explaining your views on what we asked about, namely what the sharing of children and women will amount to for our guardians, and how the children will be brought up while they are still small. After all, the time between birth and the beginning of formal education seems to be the most troublesome period of all. Yeah, ask any parent. So, try to tell us in what way it should be handled. Socrates. It is not easy to explain, my happy fellow. It raises even more doubts than the topics we have discussed so far. One might, in fact, doubt whether what we proposed is possible. And, even if one granted that it is entirely so, one might still have doubts about whether it would be for the best. That, then, is why I was somewhat hesitant to bring it up. I was afraid, my dear comrade, that our argument might seem to be no more than wishful thinking. Oh, so he's like, yeah, I did kind of want to skip it, because once you hear this, you're going to think it's crazy. And in some ways, I think it is. I think the existence of the family is kind of the it's kind of the biggest impediment to, like, radical political experiments, because as soon as you have anything outside of, like, a nuclear family, you say, okay, we're just going to get all these people together, and they're going to share everything, like, whoa, what about family, man? Like, what about my brother? What about, like, my kids? So that's really, see, I think that's the number one force keeping social, like, society stabilized, is people not wanting to have anything different about their family. And I get the sense that's the real reason it's going to seem like wishful thinking, because it's just like there's no way you're going to convince people just to give up the people who are most important to them, unless you'd, like, steal them at birth, which he has previously advocated for. Glaucon. Do not hesitate at all. You see, your audience won't be inconsiderate, or incredulous, or hostile. Socrates. My very good fellow, are you saying that because you want to encourage me? Glaucon. I am. Well, you are having precisely the opposite effect. If I were confident that I was speaking with knowledge, your encouragement would all be very well. When one is among knowledgeable and beloved friends, and one is speaking what one knows to be the truth about the greatest and most beloved things, one can feel both secure and confident. But to produce arguments when one is uncertain and searching, as I am doing, is a frightening thing, and makes one feel insecure. I'm not afraid of being ridiculed. That would be childish indeed. but I am afraid that if I fail to secure the truth, just where it is most important to do so, I will not only fall myself, but drag my friends down as well. So I bow to Adrasteia, Glaucon, for what I am about to say. You see, I suspect that involuntary homicide is a lesser crime than misleading people about beautiful, good, and just norms. Wow, I haven't seen that in the I don't know, Register of Crimes. It's like, what's the FBI code for misleading people about beautiful, good, and just norms? That is a risk it would be better to run among enemies than among friends. Mislead your enemies about beautiful, good, and just norms. So you have well and truly encouraged me. Okay, so he's saying this part of his argument is shakiest, so he's very hesitant to say what it is. Again, it seems like I find this persuasive in as much as it's like we're like begging him to go on, whereas before I was just like, oh, Socrates, please stop talking. So I think it's like he's a pretty clever speaker. Glaucon laughed and said, well, Socrates, if we suffer from any false note you strike in the argument, we will release you, as we would in a homicide case, as guiltless and no deceiver of us. So you may speak with confidence. Yeah, I don't think that really works. It's like, okay, like, well, we could play Russian roulette, but you gotta absolve me if I accidentally shoot you instead. Socrates, well, it is true. The one who is acquitted in that situation is guiltless, so the law says. And if it is true there, it is probably true here, too. Glaucon, on these grounds, then, tell us. Socrates, I will have to go back again, then, and say now what perhaps I should have said in the proper place. But maybe it is all right, after having completed a male drama, to perform a female one next, especially when you demand it in this way. I'm going to check out this note because I have no idea what a male drama and a female drama are. This may be an allusion to the mimes of Sophron of Syracuse, which were divided into male mimes. Did I say mimes? Mimes. In which men were represented, and female ones in which women were represented. Okay. The mimes of Sophron of Syracuse. Okay, yeah, I don't know what he's getting at, though, like how he completed a male drama and what the female one is. For people born and educated as we have described, then, there is, I believe, no correct way to acquire and employ children and women other than to follow the path on which we first set them. Surely in our argument, we tried to establish the men as guard dogs of their flock. Okay, I think what he means with the male and female is basically he's been talking about these traditionally male tasks of being a potter, a carpenter, and all the jobs, and being the soldiers, and now he's going to kind of look at the domicile or child rearing or other historically female activities. Glaucon, yes. Socrates, then let's proceed by giving corresponding rules for birth and rearing, and see whether they suit us or not. How? As follows. Do we think that the females of our guard dogs should join in guarding precisely what the males guard, hunt with them, and share everything with them? He's used this dog language, I think in every book. He has referred, or at least as soon as these guardians showed up, he referred to them as dogs. And if you remember from the very beginning, he said, well, we never find somebody who's both spirited and kind. He's like, wait a minute, a dog is both spirited and kind. They'll be just like dogs, who love philosophy. Okay. So yeah, write a paper about that. Or do we think that they should stay indoors and look after the house, on the grounds that they are incapable of doing this because they must bear and rear the puppies, while the males should work and have the entire care of the flock? Okay, what are the female guard dogs supposed to do? Glaucon, they should share everything, except that we employ the females as we would weaker animals, and the males as we would employ stronger ones. Okay. Fairly progressive stance for the 4th century BC. Socrates, Is it possible, then, to employ an animal for the same tasks as another if you do not give it the same upbringing and education? No, it is not. Then if we employ women for the same tasks as men, they must also be taught the same things. Pretty far ahead of his time. Glaucon, yes. Now, we gave the latter musical and physical training. Yes. So we must also give these two crafts as well as military training to the women and employ them in the same way. Man, he's talking about women in the military over 2,000 years ago. Unbelievable. That seems reasonable, given what you say. But perhaps many of the things we are now saying, because they are contrary to custom, would seem ridiculous if they were put into practice. Indeed they would. What do you see as the most ridiculous aspect of them? Isn't it obvious that it is the idea of the women exercising stripped in the palestras alongside the men? And not just the young women, but the older ones too. Like the old men we see in the gymnasiums who, even though their bodies are wrinkled and not pleasant to look at, still love physical training. Yeah, it's like, you've been to the YMCA. Nobody wants to see that, but you do. Okay, I'm gonna look up the footnote here. It's gonna tell us about palestras. Okay, the women will be gumnozominius. Anybody who knows Greek, you can fill us in here. Which can mean stripped naked, but often also means wearing a tunic or undergarment without a cloak. A palestra was a wrestling school and training ground. Okay. Yeah, so they don't know if it's naked or just in their undies. Yeah, you don't see this every day. Glaucon, yes, by Zeus, that would look really ridiculous, at least under present conditions. Yet, since we have started to discuss the matter, we must not be afraid of the various jokes that the wits will make, both about this sort of change in musical and physical training, and, even more so, about the change in the bearing of arms and the mounting of cavalry horses. Okay, I'm going to look this up. Come on, note 7. What you got for us? Sorry, I can't click today for some reason. A reference perhaps to Aristophanes' Assemblywoman, which makes fun of the idea of women having political power and making laws like these. As in English, the term hoplon was refer to the male genitals, and ichuin, mounting riding, to refer to sexual intercourse. The things you learn. Okay, so basically he's saying, like, look, reason leads us to believe that women need to be treated the same as men. Like, we're going to have unisex bathrooms, and they're just going to be training naked next to each other in the wrestling school. People might make fun of it, but that's where reason has led us. Yeah, and they'll be making jokes about hoplons and uichien. Glaucon, you're right. But since we have started, we must move on to the rougher part of the law, and ask these wits not to do their own job, but to be serious. This is interesting only because his entire premise of justice is people doing their own job. And now he's like, okay, except for you darn wits and critics, don't do your job. Just listen to me. Be serious for a minute. He didn't like actors either, if you recall. And we will remind them that it is not long since the Greeks thought it was shameful and ridiculous, as many barbarians still do, for men to be seen stripped. And that when first the Cretans and then the Lacedaemonians began the gymnasiums, the wits of the time had the opportunity to make a comedy of it all. Or don't you think so? So yeah, when all the guys got naked, people made fun of it. They just hate change. They'll be making fun of the women too, but don't listen to them. Alright, Glaucon, I certainly do. But when it became clear, I take it, to those who employed these practices, that it was better to strip than to cover up all such parts, the laughter in the eyes faded away because of what the arguments had proved to be best. And this showed that it is a fool who finds anything ridiculous except what is bad, or tries to raise a laugh at the sight of anything except what is stupid or bad, or, putting it the other way around, who takes seriously any standard of what is beautiful, other than what is good. Ah, there it is. Okay, this is like one of the most popular and perhaps pernicious ideas in history, which is that which is beautiful is also good. Talked about this a little bit before, but I think it's kind of I think there's a lot of relevance today in like Instagram. It's like, oh, look at this beautiful thing I made. Look, this is up so beautiful, so beautiful, so beautiful. Is it good? No one asks that. Where's the Instagram for morality? That's what I want to know. Okay, so we don't like those people, and yeah, whatever. He's just saying it made sense. People laughed at it. They got over it. All right, Glaucon, absolutely. Socrates, well then, shouldn't we first agree about whether our proposals are viable or not? And mustn't we give anyone who wishes to do so, whether it is someone who loves a joke or someone serious, the opportunity to dispute whether the female human does have the natural ability to share in all the tasks of the male sex, or none at all, or in some but not others, and in particular, whether this holds in the case of warfare? By making the best beginning in this way, wouldn't one also be likely to reach the best conclusion? Okay, so what is this beginning? Okay, so we're going to say whether it's viable, and then, yeah, let anybody object to this fairly radical proposal that men and women are allowed to do the same jobs. Glaucon, of course. Socrates, so, would you like us to dispute with one another on their behalf, so that their side of the argument won't be attacked without defenders? Glaucon, why not? Socrates, and let's say this on their behalf. Socrates and Glaucon, yeah, right, hypothetical objector. You do not need other people to dispute you. After all, you yourselves, when you were beginning to found your city, agreed that each one had to do the job for which he was naturally suited. We did agree to that, I think. Of course we did, says Glaucon. Socrates, continuing to quote the critic, can it be, then, that a woman is not by nature very different from a man? Of course she is different. Then isn't it also appropriate to assign a different job to each of them, the one for which they are naturally suited? Certainly. So this is interesting because Socrates previously was kind of railing against actors, and he's like, oh, you shouldn't imitate somebody. That shows like this multifarious nature, and everybody should be sticking to their job. And now, so the thing that I raised at that point was that I thought it was kind of funny that Plato was like writing in the voice of all these different characters, while at the same time saying, don't try to imitate different characters in this ideal city. And now, even his character, Socrates, is putting on a voice of somebody else. So you got like Plato writing as Socrates, speaking as someone else, which supposedly none of these people should be doing in the first place in the ideal city. Okay, Glaucon says certainly. How is it then that you're not making a mistake now and contradicting yourselves when you say that men and women must do the same job, seeing that they have natures that are most distinct? Now Socrates speaking. Do you have any defense, you amazing fellow, against that attack? Glaucon, it is not easy to think of one on the spur of the moment. On the contrary, I shall ask, indeed I am asking, you to explain the argument on our side as well, whatever it is. Okay, so we would call this an essentialist argument. That's like, oh, men and women have different natures. Like, I don't know what that means. Maybe he'll explain. That, Glaucon, and many other problems of the same sort, which I foresaw long ago, was what I was afraid of when I hesitated to tackle the law concerning the possession and upbringing of women and children. No, by Zeus, it certainly does not seem to be a simple matter. Socrates, no, it is not. But the fact is that whether one falls into a small diving pool or into the middle of the greatest sea, one has to swim all the same. Wise words. Of course, says Glaucon. But we must swim too, and try to save ourselves from the sea of argument, hoping for a dolphin to pick us up, or for some other unlikely rescue. Please, please, dolphin. It seems so. Come on then, let's see if we can find a way out. We have agreed, of course, that different natures must have different pursuits, and that the natures of a woman and a man are different. But we now say that those different natures must have the same pursuits. Isn't that the charge against us? Yes, exactly. What a noble power, Glaucon, the craft of disputation possesses. Alright, I will look at the note here. Note number 9, see glossary of terms. Not going to do that. Glaucon, why is that? Because many people seem to me to fall into it, even against their wills, and think they're engaging not in heuristic, but in discussion. Okay, there is... Alright. We're going to learn some terms here. Oh, come on. I don't have a link to the glossary of terms. Okay, I do... Okay, well, we'll see. We'll keep going with this. The Socratic dialogue has a Greek name, too. I don't think it's heuristic. I think it's eclectic. But maybe he'll elucidate what's going on here. Okay, not in heuristic, but in discussion. This happens because they are unable to examine what has been said by dividing it up into kinds. Instead, it is on the purely verbal level that they look for the contradiction in what has been said and employ heuristic, not dialectic, on one another. Okay. Yeah, don't know what heuristic is. Somebody leave a note, because I can't look it up right now. Oh, maybe I can Wikipedia. Oh, here we go. Got the dictionary. Built-in dictionary for the win. Heuristic. Adjective. Of or characterized by debate or argument. Aiming at winning rather than reaching the truth. Ah, okay. So, okay. So I think what's going on here, heuristic is you're just trying to win the debate. You're not actually trying to arrive at the truth. And then dialectic is like you got two people going back and forth, slowly trying to arrive at truth rather than just victory. Glaucon. Yes, it certainly does happen to many people. But surely it is not pertinent to us at the moment, is it? It most certainly is. At any rate, we're in danger of unconsciously dealing in disputation. How? We're trying to establish the principle that different natures should not be assigned the same pursuits in a bold and heuristic manner, on the verbal level. Good Lord. But we did not at all investigate what kind of natural difference or sameness we had in mind, or in what regard the distinction was pertinent, when we assigned different pursuits to different natures and the same ones to the same. Okay, this verbal level, I don't really know what he's talking about here, but maybe it'll be clear in a minute here. Okay, so he's saying we first need to figure out what these... We just said, oh, there are natural differences between men and women without enumerating what they are. Glaucon, no, we did not investigate that. Socrates, and because we did not, it is open to us, apparently, to ask ourselves whether the natures of bald and long-haired men are the same or opposite. And, once we agree that they are opposite, it is open to us to forbid the long-haired ones to be shoemakers, if that is what the bald ones are to be, or vice versa. This is great. This is a very common, and this specific example, when people are like, well, like they want to talk about, I don't know, racism or sexism or something, and they're like, well, let's just say a bald person versus a long-haired person. And so he made this argument 2,000 years ago. Okay, so yeah, and you see how ridiculous it is to forbid a long-haired person from being a shoemaker. As Glaucon said, but that would be ridiculous. Socrates, and is it ridiculous for any other reason than that we did not have in mind every kind of difference and sameness in nature, but were keeping our eyes only on the kind of difference and sameness that was pertinent to the pursuits themselves? We meant, for example, that a male and female whose souls are suited for medicine have the same nature, or don't you think so? Okay, so he's saying, okay, yeah, look, bald people and long-haired people are different. They have different natures. That doesn't mean they should have different jobs. Maybe the same is true with men and women. Think about that. Glaucon, I do. Socrates, but a male doctor and a male carpenter have different ones. Of course, completely different. We're talking about different natures? Yeah. Male doctors and male carpenters have different natures, but male doctors and female doctors have the same nature. So that's what he's saying. Really, really focused on kind of professions and craftsmanship here. Almost obsessed with it. And maybe again that's just for social stability. It's just like, okay, everybody, you got your job, do your job. Don't ask questions. You don't have the carpenter nature. Don't try to change jobs. In the case of both the male and the female sex, then, if one of them is shown to be different from the other with regard to a particular craft or pursuit, we will say that it is the one who should be assigned to it. But if it is apparent that they differ in this respect alone, that the female bears the offspring while the male mounts the female, we will say it has not yet been demonstrated that a woman is different from a man with regard to what we are talking about. And we will continue to believe our guardians and their women should have the same pursuits. He's like, yeah, if literally the only difference has to do with birth and sex, then that doesn't have anything to do with jobs. Why are we keeping women out of the profession of medicine? Huh? And rightly so. Next, when we urge our opponent to tell us the precise craft or pursuit relevant to the organization of the city, for which a woman's nature and a man's are not the same, but different? Yeah, tell us, opponent. That would be a fair question, at least. Socrates. Perhaps, then, this other person might say, just as you did a moment ago, that it is not easy to give an adequate answer on the spur of the moment, but that after reflection, it would not be at all difficult. Yeah. Whatever, a few pages ago. I do also like this kind of hypothetical critic as it's almost like an instruction of how to debate or how to do philosophy. Because when you're reading this, you're like, oh yeah, to do philosophy, you just need like a group of friends hanging out after dinner and talking and debating. And then, well, what if you two start agreeing on something? Like, because Socrates persuaded Polemarchus, for example, at the very beginning. And then once you agree on something, you still want to get at the truth. So you have to, you need to kind of invent a critic and say, okay, what is this hypothetical critic going to say? So I like how he's kind of led us up to that way of doing philosophy. Socrates, do you want us to ask the one who disputes things in this way, then, to follow us to see whether we can somehow show him that there is no pursuit relevant to the management of the city that is peculiar to women? Of course. Come on, then, we will say to him, give us an answer. Is this what you meant by one person being naturally well-suited for something and another naturally unsuited? This is him speaking as the critic. Wait. We will say to him... No, I guess this is them talking to the critic. Yeah, okay. So this is him speaking in quotation marks, but he's talking to his hypothetical critic. That the one learns it easily, the other with difficulty, that the one, after a little instruction, can discover a lot for himself in the subject being studied, whereas the other, even if he gets a lot of instruction and attention, does not even retain what he was taught, that the bodily capacities of the one adequately serve his mind while those of the other obstruct his. Are there any other factors than these by which you distinguish a person who is naturally well suited for each pursuit, and from one who is not? Ain't that the truth? It's like, let's just look only at actual job qualifications. Do they learn quickly on the job? Can they do the job? This guy is so far ahead of his time. Glaucon. No one will be able to mention any others. Socrates. Do you know anything practiced by human beings, then, at which the male sex is not superior to the female in all those ways? Or must we take a long story of it by discussing weaving and the preparation of baked and boiled food? The very pursuits in which the female sex is thought to excel, and in which its defeat would expose it to the greatest ridicule of all. Okay, so do you know of anything at which she's not superior? Okay, so the initial argument is like, well, actually, men are better at all that stuff than women. I think that's what he's saying. Men were in charge of roasting meat. It's certainly true in my parents' household. Okay, so let's see where he goes with this. It is true that the one sex shows greater mastery than the other in pretty much every area. So he's like, okay, actually men in the observed world here seem to be better at all this stuff. Yet there are many women who are better than many men at many things. But on the whole, it is as you say. Okay, so it's kind of the statistical argument. Socrates, then, my friend, there is no pursuit relevant to the management of the city that belongs to a woman, because she is a woman, or to a man because he is a man. But the various natural capacities are distributed in a similar way between both creatures, and women can share by nature in every pursuit, and men in every one, though for the purposes of all of them, women are weaker than men. Of course. Alright. What's this footnote going to say? Epipasi. The claim is not that no woman is stronger or better than any man in any such pursuit, but that the physical weakness of women is a relevant factor in all of them. Okay. Yeah, so he's just like, alright, he's actually kind of, I think he's actually kind of anti-essentialist here. He's just like, yeah, there are different distributions of these skills. On the whole, women are weaker than men, but that's the only way it kind of figures into this. I think that's what he's saying. Glaucon, of course. So we shall assign all of them to men and none to women. Wait, okay, let's see. Okay, I'm just going to follow this argument through. I may have misunderstood it. How could we? We could not. For we will say, I imagine, that one woman is suited for medicine, another not, and that one is naturally musical, another not. Of course. Won't one be suited for physical training or war then, while another is unwarlike and not a lover of physical training? I suppose so. And one a philosopher, lover of wisdom, another a misofficer, hater of wisdom. Yeah, you darn misofficer. And one spirited, another spiritless. That too. So there's also a woman who is suited to be a guardian and one who is not. Wasn't that the sort of nature we selected for our male guardians too? Okay. So we're saying, yeah, for any of these things we could find one woman who has the quality we're looking for and another that doesn't. Ergo, I bet we could find some females with a guardian nature. It certainly was. A woman and a man can have the same nature then, relevant to guarding the city, except to the extent that she is weaker and he is stronger. Apparently so. Women of that sort, then, must be selected to live and guard with the men of the same sort, since they are competent to do so and are akin to the men by nature. Ah, so he's like, look, they all have the same guardian nature. Let's just have them all working out naked next to each other. Glaucon, of course. Mustn't we assign the same pursuits to the same natures? Yes, the same ones. We've come around, then, to what we said before. We are agreed that it is not against nature to assign musical and physical training to the female guardians. Absolutely. So, we are not legislating impossibilities, or mere fantasies, at any rate, since the law we were proposing is in accord with nature. Rather, it is the contrary laws that now turn out to be more contrary to nature, it seems. Dun dun dun. Okay. And it does, again, that contrary to nature shows up a lot, like, later in history. It's like, oh, women can't do that, it's contrary to their nature. And he's like, you don't know that. There's nothing about femaleness that makes, whatever, firefighting contrary to their nature. Social construct. Glaucon, it does seem that way. Now, wasn't our inquiry about whether our proposals were both viable and best? Yes, it was. And that they are in fact viable has been agreed, has it not? Yes. So, we must next come to an agreement about whether they are for the best. Okay, so he's saying it's viable. He's kind of proven, yeah, women can do all these things. They shouldn't be excluded from the club. But is it best for that? Are they going to be the best guardians they can be with women in their ranks? Glaucon, clearly. Socrates, now, as regards producing a woman who is equipped for guardianship, we won't have one sort of education that will produce our guardian men, will we, and another our women, especially not when it will have the same nature to work on in both cases? Yeah, no single-sex education. No, we won't. What is your belief about this, then? What? The notion that one man is better or worse than another. Or do you think they are all alike? They're not all alike. Not at all. In the city we are founding, who do you think will turn out to be better men? Our guardians who get the education we have described, or the shoemakers who are educated in shoemaking? What a ridiculous question. I realize that. Aren't the guardians the best of the citizens? By far. What about the female guardians? Won't they be the best of the women? Yes, they are by far the best too. Is there anything better for a city than that the best possible men and women should come to exist in it? Ah. So the best city has the best people at any cost. Okay. No, there's not. And that is what musical and physical training, employed as we have described, will achieve? Of course. Then the law we were proposing was not only possible, but also best for the city. Yes? Okay, so he's saying, we're trying to figure out whether it's best. What can be better than having people who are the best at what they do? And we're going to have amazing musical education and physical training, so that's going to bring out the best people, so that's going to be the best city, and that's a wrap. Glaucon, yes. Then the female guardians must strip, clothing themselves in virtue instead of cloaks. Oh, man. Okay. They must share in warfare and whatever else guarding the city involves, and do nothing else. But within these areas, the women must be assigned lighter tasks than the men because of the weakness of their sex. And the man who laughs at the sight of women stripped for physical training, when their stripping is for the best, is plucking the unripe fruit of laughter's wisdom, and knows nothing, it seems, about what he is laughing at or what he is doing. For it is, and always will be, the finest saying that what is beneficial is beautiful, what is harmful, ugly. Alright, so this is how he's like, alright, they got to strip along with everybody else. I don't know if this is... yeah, I don't know. I mean, it does make this... It kind of gives the Republic a little, like, kind of viral appeal in the sense that it's like, oh yeah, dude, you got to read the Republic. Like, there are going to be all these, like, naked women in it. Like, you got to... It's the best... That's what the best city has. So I don't know. It's like you got to get your book read somehow. This seems like a pretty good way. I definitely like. I have not read this since high school, and I definitely remember this passage when I was reading it, like in 10th grade. Glaucon, absolutely. Socrates, may we claim then that we are avoiding one wave, as it were, in our discussion of the law about women, so that we are not altogether swept away when we declare that our male and female guardians must share all their pursuits? And then our argument is somehow self-consistent when it states that this is both viable and beneficial? It is certainly no small wave that you are avoiding. You won't think it is so great when you see the next. Okay, avoiding... What is a wave? I mean, I guess it's a metaphor. It begins at 4:53. Okay. All right. Oh, yeah, I guess because I think he was talking because he had that swimming metaphor before. He's like, "Oh, we better swim in the swimming pool or in the ocean, wherever we may be." So, okay, I guess we're swimming in the ocean, and then we got to avoid the wave that could drown us in the argument. Okay, I won't see it unless you tell me about it. Okay, should I look up this note? Worthless note. The law that is consistent with that one, and with the others that preceded it, is this, I take it. What? That all these women should be shared among all the men, that no individual woman and man should live together, and that the children too should be shared, with no parent knowing its own offspring, and no child its parent. Whoa! Alright, that became a modest proposal pretty quickly. He's like, alright, they should be guardians, like, okay, you know, women in the military, great. Everybody getting naked together, all right, fine. People will laugh. And abolishing the family. That wave is far greater and more dubitable than the other, both as regards its viability and its benefit. All right, yeah. So let's see if it's viable and best that we have this kind of free love, guardian, shared parenting arrangement. It takes a village. As far as its benefit is concerned, at least, I do not think anyone would argue that the sharing of women and children is not the greatest good, if indeed it is viable. But I imagine there would be a lot of dispute about whether or not it is viable. No, both could be very well disputed. You may not have to face a coalition of arguments. So now Glaucon's like, yeah, you got to prove this is viable and then prove it's best. I'm not believing anything you say here, Socrates. I thought I had at least escaped one of them, namely whether you thought the proposal was beneficial, and then I would just be left with the argument about whether it is viable or not. Okay. He's like, I thought you'd agree that it was for the best. Anyway, if only we could get there somehow. Well, you did not escape unnoticed, so you'll have to give an argument for both. I must pay the penalty. But do me this favor. Let me take a holiday and act like those lazy people who make a banquet for themselves of their own thoughts when they are walking alone. Okay. That's what I do. People like that, as you know, do not bother to find out how any of their appetites might actually be fulfilled, so as to avoid the trouble of deliberating about what is possible and what is not. They assume that what they want is available, and then proceed to arrange all the rest, taking pleasure in going through everything they will do when they get it, thus making their already lazy souls even lazier. Well, I too am succumbing to this weakness at the moment, and want to postpone consideration of the viability of our proposals until later. I will assume now that they are viable, if you will permit me to do so, and examine how the rulers will arrange them when they come to pass. And I will try to show that, if they were put into practice, they would be the most beneficial arrangements of all, both for the city and for its guardians. These are the things I will try to examine with you first, leaving the others for later, if indeed you will permit this. Okay, so he's going to prove that it's most beneficial. He'll figure out viability later. It's like monorail. This thing's going to be amazing. Let me just show you how amazing it'll be. It's like, can we actually build this thing? Like, shh, don't worry about it. Okay. You have my permission. Proceed with the examination. And it is interesting. So he says it's going to be the most beneficial both for the city and for its guardians. So before his argument was we're not doing things for the benefit of the guardians. Like, things will be fine for them, but they're not. This is not to make them happy, like as happy as they could be. That was this argument at the beginning of book 4. Now he's saying, actually, this is best for both of them. Let's see how he argues this. Well then, I imagine that if indeed our rulers, and likewise their auxiliaries, are worthy of their names, the latter will be prepared to carry out orders, and the former to give orders, obeying our laws in some cases, and imitating them in the others that we leave to their discretion. Probably so. Now, you are their lawgiver, and just the way you selected these men, you will select as the women to hand over to them those who have natures as similar to theirs as possible. Because they have shared dwellings and meals, and none of them has any private property of that sort, they will live together. And through mixing together in the gymnasia and in the rest of their daily life, they will be driven by innate necessity, I take it, to have sex with one another. Or don't you think I am talking about necessities here? Yeah. Oh, man. It's like working at a restaurant. Glaucon. Not geometric necessities, certainly, but erotic ones. They probably have a sharper capacity to persuade and attract most people. They do indeed. But the next point, Glaucon, is that for them to have unregulated sexual intercourse with one another, or to do anything else of that sort, would not be a pious thing in a city of happy people, and the rulers won't allow it. Okay, so they can't just have all the sex that they want. You got to have rules here. No, it would not be just. It is clear then that we will next have to make marriages as sacred as possible, and sacred marriages will be those that are most beneficial. Glaucon, absolutely. How then will the most beneficial ones come about? Tell me this, Glaucon. I see you have hunting dogs and quite a flock of noble birds at home. Have you, by Zeus, noticed anything in particular about their marriages and breeding? Like what? In the first place, though they are all noble animals, aren't there some that are, or turn out to be, the very best? There are. Do you breed from them all to the same extent, then, or do you try hard to breed as far as possible from the best ones? Oh, I see where this is going. Time for some selective breeding. From the best ones. And do you breed from the youngest, the oldest, or as far as possible from those in their prime? From those in their prime. And if they were not bred in this way, do you think that your race of birds and dogs would get much worse? I do. What do you think about horses and other animals? Is the situation any different with them? It would be strange if it were. Good heavens, my dear comrade, then our need for eminent rulers is quite desperate, if indeed the same also holds for the human race. Dun. Well, it does hold of them, but so what? It follows that our rulers will have to employ a great many drugs. You know that when people do not need drugs for their bodies, they are prepared to follow a regimen. We regard even an inferior doctor as adequate. But when drugs are needed, we know that a much bolder doctor is required. Uh-oh. Dr. Socrates! That's true, but what's your point? This. It looks as though, here it comes, our rulers will have to employ a great many lies and deceptions for the benefit of those they rule. And you remember, we said all such things were useful as a kind of drug. There's deception once again. This has come back a number of times. We had the magnificent myth, the noble lie about the metals. We had him saying sometimes you have to tell children lies. We had him saying we got to lie to the guardians about the nature of death. We said we have to lie to the guardians about their education and said that it was a kind of dream that happened, that they're really from the center of the earth. And then we had that throwaway line, which, again, I keep thinking is consequential because this book started out, Glaucon said, hold on, you kind of said, as like you mentioned this thing and treated it as inconsequential, that men and women will be guardians and they'll share everything, but like, wait, that little throwaway line, you got to pay attention to that, I want you to spell this out, and now he spent in the entirety of book 5 explaining it. So it seems to me maybe it's another little hint that little throwaway lines might have a lot of significance to them. And the one in particular I'm thinking of is the one in book 4, I think in the last video, where he said something to the effect of, so everything that we've said so far is not a complete lie, correct? And that tells me, well, maybe it is. I believe he was talking about the nature of the soul then. And so maybe this is a lie for the benefit of the people who are being lied to. And you also remember, he's still talking to Glaucon, who is in the next generation. He is Plato's age. He's actually Plato's brother. So this would be, if Socrates were to lie to somebody, it would be to Glaucon or Adeimantus, and it would not be to Cephalus, who is older than Socrates. So this, maybe I think a case could be built that Socrates himself is lying to Glaucon, and although I don't know exactly, which are the lies, what are the things Socrates actually believes? Is there any way to know? But lies are so important to the correct functioning of society, according to Socrates. Okay, and they're useful as a kind of drug. I will take this moment to plug one of my other books here on the Evan Miller channel, Brave New World. It has a lot of things in common with the Republic. It's not a very well-written novel, but it does have a lot of interesting ideas. Similar to this, abolishing the family, actually using actual drugs in addition to lies, and using eugenics to create the best possible people, alpha plus intellectuals, because when people are not lied to and drugged, they just end up in a state of war, according to Aldous Huxley. So check it out. All right, so let's see where this argument goes. Glaucon, and we were correct. Socrates, well, in the case of marriages and procreation, its correctness is particularly evident. How so? It follows from our previous agreement that the best men should mate with the best women in as many cases as possible, while the opposite should hold of the worst men and women, and that the offspring of the former should be reared, but not that of the latter, if our flock is going to be an eminent one. And all this must occur without anyone knowing except the rulers, if again our herd of guardians is to remain as free from faction as possible. Okay, what does it mean, not rear the child? Just like leave it out on the hillside? I don't know. Okay, so best women, best men are mating, but they're not allowed to know or something. Let's see what kind of lie they're told. Glaucon, that's absolutely right. So then, we will have to establish by law certain festivals and sacrifices, at which we will bring together brides and bridegrooms, and our poets must compose suitable hymns for the marriages that take place. We will leave the number of marriages for the rulers to decide. That will enable them to keep the number of males as constant as possible, taking into account war, disease, and everything of that sort, so that the city will, as far as possible, become neither too great nor too small. Okay, we got to regulate the birth rate here. So, yeah, I like how there's these big festivals. It's kind of like I don't know, aren't there like big mass weddings in like South Korea? It's like a big football stadium thing. I think it's kind of like that. Glaucon, that's right. I imagine that some sophisticated lotteries will have to be created then, so that an inferior person of that sort will blame chance rather than the rulers at each mating time. Like, oh man, I didn't get to mate this year. Oh well. Yes, indeed. And presumably, the young men who are good at war or at other things must, among other prizes and awards, be given a greater opportunity to have sex with the women, in order that a pretext may also be created at the same time for having as many children as possible fathered by such men. So he's like, all right, we want as many children from the best men as possible, so the guys who are best at war, that's the ones that we want having a lot of sex, so we'll be like, make it an award for being great at warfare, and then also it'll be nice because we'll have all these like genetically superior children being born. Alright, Glaucon, that's right. And then, as offspring are born, won't they be taken by the officials appointed for this purpose, whether these are men or women or both? For surely our offices are also open to both men and women. Taken by these officials. Okay. Glaucon, yes. And I suppose they will take the offspring of good parents to the rearing pen and hand them over to special nurses who live in a separate part of the city. But those of inferior parents or any deformed offspring of the others, they will hide in a secret and unknown place, as is fitting. Okay, so they're just given birth left and right, and then just taking, it's like, oh, we got to take it to the incubator, and you never see it again. Yes, if indeed the race of guardians is going to remain pure. And won't these nurses also take care of the children's feeding by bringing the mothers to the rearing pen when their breasts are full, while devising every device to ensure that no mother will recognize her offspring? And won't they provide other women as wet nurses if the mothers themselves have insufficient milk, taking care, however, that the mothers breastfeed the children for only a moderate period of time, and assigning sleepless nights and similar burdens to the nurses and wet nurses? Glaucon, you are making childbearing a soft job for the guardians' women. Yeah, I think certain people could see some benefit in this. You know, it's like, okay, look, you'll have a kid, but you're not going to have to, like, lose sleep for a year as a result. If you don't make enough milk, it's taken care of. We got all these wet nurses hanging around. You don't need to feel guilty about that. You don't need to feel bad for using Similac or whatever, like using the formula. Don't feel bad about that. We got plenty of wet nurses taking care of everything. Okay. Socrates. Yes, properly so. But let's take up the next thing we proposed. We said, as you know, that offspring should be bred from parents who are in their prime. True? Do you agree that a woman's prime lasts on average for a period of 20 years, and a man's for 30? Which years are those? A woman should bear children for the city from the age of 20 to that of 40, whereas a man should beget them for the city from the time that he passes his peak as a runner until he reaches 55. So I guess subtracting, that's the age of 25. His peak as a runner. Glaucon, at any rate, that is the physical and mental prime for both. Socrates, then, if any male who is younger or older than that engages in reproduction for the community, we will say that his offense is neither pious nor just. For the child he fathers for the city, if it escapes discovery, will be begotten and born without the benefit of sacrifices, or of the prayers that priestesses, priests, and the entire city will offer at every marriage festival, asking that from good and beneficial parents, ever better and more beneficial offspring should be produced. On the contrary, it will be born in darkness, through a terrible act of lack of self-control. Okay. Glaucon, that's right. The same law will apply if a man, who is still of breeding age, has sex with a woman in her prime when the rulers have not mated them. We will say that he is imposing an illegitimate, unauthorized, and unholy child on the city. Whew. Okay. The rulers have the final say here about who goes with who. Glaucon, that's absolutely right. But when women and men have passed breeding age, I imagine we will leave them free to have sex with whomever they wish. Hey. Except that a man may not have sex with his daughter, mother, daughter's daughters, or mother's female ancestors, or a woman with her son and his descendants, or her father and his ancestors. I don't think he mentioned immediate siblings here. And we will permit all that only after telling them to be very careful, and to not let even a single fetus see the light of day, if one should happen to be conceived. But if one does not force its way out, they must dispose of it, or does force its way out, they must dispose of it on the understanding that no nurture is available for such a child. Okay, so it's like, alright, be responsible here. All that sounds reasonable, but how will they recognize one another's fathers, daughters, and others you mentioned? Ah, ain't that the trick? So, how are you not going to sleep with your father if you don't know who he is? Socrates, they won't. Instead, from the day a man becomes a bridegroom, he will call all offspring born in the 10th month afterward, and in the 7th, of course, his sons, if they are male, and his daughters if they are female, and they will call him father. From the day a man becomes a bridegroom. Okay, so I guess they're only mating on these very particular days. So it's like, okay, that's, yeah, you kind of have to have these synchronized births, otherwise you can, figure out who the daddy is. You don't need Maury doing the DNA test. Yeah, okay, so he's saying it's like you get married, you have a lot of sex, everybody gets married on the same day, everybody has a lot of sex, and then all these offspring are born, and you're like, well, these are all my sons and daughters. So you can't have sex with any of those later on. Similarly, he will call their children his grandchildren, and they in turn will call the group to which he belongs grandfathers and grandmothers. And those who were born at the same time as their mothers and fathers were breeding, they will call their brothers and sisters. Thus, as we were saying just now, they will avoid sexual relations with each other. However, the law will allow brothers and sisters to have sex with one another if the lottery works out that way and the Pythia approves. Okay, why not? Greek law did not usually permit marriage between biological siblings, which would be included in the class referred to here. Yeah. The old incest taboo. Not in effect. That then, Glaucon, or something like it, is how the sharing of women and children by the guardians of your city will be handled. The next point we need is to have confirmed by argument, then, that this arrangement is both consistent with the rest of the Constitution and by far the best. Isn't that so? Yes, by Zeus it is. As a beginning step toward reaching agreement, shouldn't we ask ourselves what we think is the greatest good for the organization of the city, the one at which the legislator should aim in making its laws, and what the greatest evil? And then examine whether what we have just described is in harmony with the tracks of the good we have just found, and in disharmony with those of the bad. Absolutely. Now, do we know of any greater evil for a city than what tears it apart and makes it many instead of one? Or any greater good than what binds it together and makes it one? It's all about the greater good here. No, we do not. Well, doesn't sharing pleasure and pain bind it together? When, as far as possible, all the citizens feel more or less the same joy or pain at the same gains or losses. Okay, so we need everybody happy and sad about the same things. And that's what binds us together. This terrible thing happened somewhere in the country, we all feel bad about it. That's what makes us a nation. But if like a terrible thing happens in another country, you're just like, I don't feel as bad. Glaucon, absolutely. Socrates, on the other hand, doesn't the privatization of these things dissolve the city? When some are overwhelmed with distress and others overjoyed by the same things happening to the city or some of its inhabitants. Of course. So maybe it's like, oh, look, I'm so happy about my baby. It's like, well, I'm not happy about your baby. We're not bound together in this joy. Socrates, and isn't that what happens when people do not apply such phrases as mine and not mine in unison in the city? And similarly with someone else's? Precisely. Then isn't the city that is best governed the one in which the vast majority of people apply mine and not mine to the same things on the basis of the same principle? Certainly. Oh man, this is like ultimate communism here. Socrates, and isn't it the city whose condition is most like that of a single person? I mean, when one of us somehow hurts his finger, you know, the entire partnership, the one that binds body and soul together into a single system under the ruling part within it, is aware of this, and all of it as a whole feels pain in unison with the part that suffers. It's not really what happens when you hurt your finger. It's not like your toe is like, I hurt for my finger, friend. That is why we say that this person has a pain in his finger. And the same principle applies, doesn't it, to any other part of a person, whether it's suffering pain or relieved by pleasure? Yes, the same one. And to answer your question, the city that manages to come closest to this condition is the best governed city. I imagine, then, that whenever one of its citizens has an experience, whether good or bad, such a city will most certainly say that the experience is its own, and all of it together will share his pleasure or pain. Yeah, it's like this was a national tragedy. This happened to all of us, not just to the actual people it happened to. Or like going to the moon. Everybody's happy about going to the moon. We're like, we went to the moon! 99.99% of people didn't do anything. They didn't go to the moon. They weren't involved in the space program. They just sat at home and watched television and paid some taxes. But everybody felt great because they were all kind of saying, "This is ours. This is our victory. This is our accomplishment. Go Team USA." Okay, and it must be so since it's well governed. It is time for us to return to our own city. Then, to look there for the features we have agreed on and to see whether it, or rather some other city, possesses them to the greatest degree. Yes, it is. Well now, what about those other cities? Presumably, there are rulers and people in them, as well as in ours. There are. Won't all of them call one another citizens? Of course. So he's talking about other cities for some reason. Don't know why. But besides citizens, what do the people in those other cities call the rulers? In most, says Glaucon, they call them masters, but in democracies they are called just that, rulers. Socrates, what about the people in our city? Besides citizens, what do they call the rulers? Preservers and auxiliaries. So, the preservers, are those the complete guardians? I think those are the complete guardians. And then the auxiliaries. We know all about those by now. And what do they call the people? Paymasters and providers. What do the rulers in other cities call the people? Slaves. And what do the rulers call each other? Co-rulers. And ours? Co-guardians. Now, can you tell me whether a ruler in other cities could address one of his co-rulers as his kinsman and another as an outsider? Many do, at any rate. And doesn't he regard and speak of his kinsman as belonging to him while he regards the outsider as not doing so? Yes. What about your guardians? Could any of them regard or address a co-guardian as an outsider? Certainly not. He will regard everyone he meets as a brother or a sister or a father or a mother or a son or a daughter or some ancestor or descendant of these. Whew. Okay, I will pause for just a minute here. The role of language is very fascinating to me here, because he's like, we really, in order to kind of get to this sort of fascist state, or whatever you want to call it, we have to change people's thinking about how they relate to each other, and we have to lie to them for their own benefit. And in particular, we need to change the language that they use. So we have this language of father and son, mother and daughter, brother and sister. It's like if you're just born in the same cohort, those are your brothers and sisters. If, whoever was having sex 9 months before you were born, those are your parents. And it's really just a different linguistic construct. And similarly with the mine and not mine that he says we need to abolish, that's just changing language. And there is a very good essay, which I have mentioned before in this series, Politics in the English Language by George Orwell. And he talks about, kind of in this light way, at least very readable way, how language shapes our thinking about things, and how kind of using different words can shape people's perceptions. This is... If you want a much denser account of this, this was something Wittgenstein liked to talk about a lot. I haven't actually read a lot of Wittgenstein, but as I understand his basic idea is, or one of his most famous quotes is, "The limits of my language are the limits of my world." And so, if you want to control how people think about the world, think about themselves, see themselves, you can... The good place to start is by changing the words that they use and the phrases they use and the language they use, and that kind of defines how they think about these things. And then ultimately, at least in a context like this, that defines their reality. That defines the lies, it defines the kind of the building blocks for what that social world ends up being. And Socrates is saying, look, we can do this, guys. We can just redefine father and mother, we can redefine mine and not mine, and that's really how we get people to sign up for this, by just using these different words. And you think about it, I don't know, you think about like Facebook or something, or Instagram or all these other things. They use emotional language to get people to think about things in a certain way. So like you have your Facebook friends, and people really start to conflate that with their actual friends, even though it's like some guy I kind of knew in high school, or somebody I like met randomly once, or like an I don't know, Airbnb host at one point. But are they really your friends, or is that just the language construct that has kind of deceived you into thinking that these people are your friends? Or similarly, like with liking something, like what does that mean? How does someone actually like it, or are they just trying to have this appearance of approving of it, or what's the actual reality there? But we think of it in terms of the words that are presented to us, and that ultimately kind of changes how we feel about it, how we relate to it, and then kind of all the structures that come out of that. So it's an endlessly fascinating topic. All right, let's keep going. Okay, Socrates, very well put. But tell me this, too. Will your laws require them simply to use these terms of kinship? Or must they also do all the things that go along with the names? In the case of fathers, for example, must they show them the customary respect, solicitude, and obedience owed to parents? Will they fare worse at the hands of gods or men, as people whose actions are neither pious nor just, if they do otherwise? Will these be the sayings that are chanted by all the citizens, and that sound in their ears right from the earliest childhood? Or will they hear something else about their fathers, or the ones they are told to regard as their fathers, or about their other relatives? Okay, it's like, how far are we're calling them fathers. Are we just going to go all the way here and say, yeah, you have to, the same way you treat your biological father in today's society, you treat all these men in this future society or hypothetical society? Fuck, and they will hear those. It would be ridiculous if they only mouthed the terms of kinship without the actions. And there it is. There's that relationship. You change the words people use, and ultimately that changes people's actions. Socrates, so, in this city more than any other, when someone is doing well or badly, they will utter in concord the words we mentioned a moment ago, and say my such and such is doing well, and my so-and-so is doing badly. okay, I think such and so are like, it's like, oh, my father's doing well here, and just like some random guy who won the lottery. Glaucon, that's absolutely true. Socrates, well, didn't we say that this conviction and way of talking are accompanied by the having of pleasures and pains in common? Yeah. Yes, and we were right to do so. Then won't our citizens share to the fullest and call mine the very same thing? And because they share it, won't they experience to the fullest the sharing of pleasures and pains? Okay, here it is. We use language, change what's mine and not mine, and then that changes our perception of reality. Because it's like, this terrible thing happened to my sister. Like, I feel terrible for her. It's like, she's not actually your sister. She was just born at the same time as you. Of course. And in the context of the rest of the political system, isn't the sharing of women and children by the guardians responsible for it? Yes, it is by far the most important cause. But we further agreed that this sharing is the greatest good for a city, when we compared a well-governed city to the way a human body relates to pain and pleasure in one of its parts. And we were right to agree. Then, we have shown that the cause of the greatest good for our city is the sharing of women and children by the auxiliaries. Boo-doo-doo! Okay, there it is. So he's saying, if you share the women and children, people start to think of themselves as being part of this large family. And when they think of themselves in this large family, they kind of do what's best for the city, and it binds them together. So it's really, this is just like the most extreme form of nationalism that you could possibly imagine. And get rid of the individual family, make it a national family, and then have people's emotions channeled accordingly, I guess. Okay. See, is that going to be it? Is he done with the argument? I guess we have to see whether it's viable still. Good luck with that. Glaucon, yes, we certainly have. Socrates, and what is more, it is consistent with what we said before. For we said, as you know, that if these people are going to be real guardians, they should not have private houses, land, or any other possession, but should receive their upkeep from the other citizens as a wage for their guardianship, and should all eat communally. Isn't that interesting? I love this detail about the eating communally, because that, it is in large part, it's almost what defines a family. It's like families eating, they eat together. And it's, at least in my experience, it's like families that seem the strongest ones are the ones that eat every meal together and talk, and they don't watch TV or look at their phones. Like, they actually have to have a conversation and exchange information about what happened and, say thanks for cooking, Mom, etc. So this, psychologically, I think this is be pretty important. It's like, these are the people you eat with. They're your fam. Glaucon, that's right. So, as I say, doesn't what was said earlier, as well as what is being said now, make them into even better guardians and prevent them from tearing the city apart by applying the term mine and not to the same thing, but to different ones? With one person dragging into his own house whatever he, apart from the others, can get his hands on, and another into a different house to a different wife and children, who create private pleasures and pains at things that are private. Instead of that, don't our guardians share a single conviction about what is their own, aim at the same goal, and, as far as possible, feel pleasure and pain in unison? Okay. Yeah, so if you have private families, you're like, my kid did great at the baseball game. And then somebody else is like, well, my kid didn't do great, I feel bad. So now that creates a division between us. But if we're like, hey, Bobby is both of our kids, like, Bobby did great. Everybody's like, yeah, Bobby, that's my son. That's all of our son. Glaucon, absolutely. Socrates, what about lawsuits and accusations? Won't they pretty much disappear from among them because they have no private possessions except their own bodies and share all the rest? No private possession except your own body. As a result, won't they be free from faction? At any rate, from the sort of faction that the possession of property, children, and family causes among people? Okay, and again, I guess this is where the mess hall is important, because like you can't have absolutely no possessions because you have to eat. But he's like, no. They're gonna eat. They'll be provided for. It'll be like the military. Like, here's your bunk bed. Here's your mess hall. Here's all your physical needs are taken care of. All you really own is your body and a Bible or something. But I think he's getting rid of that too. Okay, so yeah, it's a big military state because they are the military. Glaucon. Yes, they will inevitably be entirely free of it. Socrates. Moreover, lawsuits neither for violence nor for assault should justifiably occur among them. Okay, here's the real trick. For we will declare surely that for people to defend themselves against others of the same age is a fine and just thing, since it will compel them to stay in good physical shape. This is great. He's like, yeah, just let them get in fights. If they're the same age, they gotta have it out. Lawsuits. Come on, I remember the good old days. Just take them out around back. Glaucon, that's right. Socrates, this law is also correct for another reason. If a spirited person vents his anger in this way, he will be less likely to move on to more serious sorts of faction. Ah, okay. So he's saying, like, if you want to have a fight, have a fight. If you don't have a fight, then one of these guys is going to sulk, and he's going to try to get his revenge in another way. He's going to try to, like, plot his revenge somehow. Just have it out. Just go at it. That's what he's saying. His words, not mine. He certainly will. As for an older person, he will be authorized to rule and punish all the younger ones. Clearly. And unless the rulers command it, it is unlikely that a younger person will ever employ any sort of violence against an older one or strike him. And I do not imagine he will fail to show him respect in other ways either, since two guardians, fear and shame, are sufficient to prevent it. Shame will prevent him from laying a hand on his parents, as will the fear that the others would come to his victim's aid. Some because they are his sons, some because they are his brothers, and some because they are his fathers. Yeah, get your hands off my son. Yes, that is what would happen. Then won't the laws induce men to live at peace with one another in all respects? Very much so. And if there's no faction among the guardians, there's no terrible danger that the rest of the city will form factions, either against them or among themselves. No, there's not. As for the pettiest of all the evils the guardians would escape, they are so unseemly, I hesitate even to mention them. So he's like, yeah, there won't be lawsuits, there's not going to be fights, really. Everybody's just going to be chilling out, because you're like, hey, we're all family here. Although, I think most violence occurs between family members in today's society. Okay, he hesitates even to mention these petty evils. The flatteries of the rich by the poor, the perplexities and sufferings involved in bringing up children, the need to make the money necessary to feed the household, the borrowings, the defaults, and all the things people have to do to provide an income to hand over to their wives and slaves to spend on housekeeping. The various troubles men endure in these areas, my dear Glaucon, are obvious, quite demeaning, and not worth discussing. Yeah, you're not going to have any money. That means you're not going to get all mad that you have to make this money to hand over to the wives and slaves. They are obvious even to the blind, says Glaucon. They will escape from all these things, then, and live a more blessedly happy life than the most blessedly happy one, that of the victors in the Olympian Games. How so? Surely, these victors are considered happy on account of only a small part of what the guardians possess, since the latter victory is even finer and their upkeep from public funds more complete. After all, the victory they gain is the salvation of the whole city, and the crown of victory they and their children receive is their upkeep in all the necessities of life. They receive privileges from their own city during their lifetime in worthy burial after their death. It's like any professional athlete. Yes, those are very fine rewards. Now, do you remember that earlier in our discussion, we were rebuked by an argument, I forget whose, to the effect that we had not made our guardians happy, that though it was possible for them to have everything that belongs to the citizens, they actually had nothing? So I think this is actually Glaucon's argument at the beginning of book 4. I like how he says he forgets whose. It's like Plato's writing this. Either he just like writes it in one go and like, I don't remember who that was back there. Or, like, he's got the manuscript, and he just thinks it's funny to say he forgets whose it is. Also, helping to kind of conflate these three characters, Glaucon, Adimantus, and Thrasymachus. They're like Rosencrantz and Guildenstern. We said, didn't we, that if this happened to come up at some point, we would look into it then, but that our concern at the time was to make our guardians guardians, and to make the city happiest possible. I remember this argument. Rather than looking to any one group within it and molding it for happiness. I remember. Well then, if indeed the life of our auxiliaries has been shown to be much finer and better than that of Olympian victors, is there any need to compare it with the lives of shoemakers or any other craftsmen, or with that of the farmers? Okay, so their life is better than the Olympian victors. Don't need to keep comparing. Like, that's the last comparison. The Olympian victors are the happiest people alive. Everybody wants to be a basketball player. I do not think there is. Nevertheless, it is surely right to repeat here what I also said on that earlier occasion. If a guardian tries to become happy in such a way that he is no longer a guardian at all, and is not satisfied with a life that is moderate, stable, and, we claim, best, but is seized by a foolish, adolescent belief about happiness, which incites him to use his power to take everything in the city for himself, he will come to realize the true wisdom of Hesiod's saying that, in a sense, the half is worth more than the whole. Okay, so he's saying, if a guardian kind of betrays the guardian way and tries to use his power to take everything for himself, so he, like, does a coup d'etat, then he'll realize, like, actually, that wasn't worth it. Which, a recurring theme in Edward Gibbon's History of the Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire. You always have these guys, even like members of this Praetorian Guard, who are kind of the equivalent of these auxiliaries, who just like seize the throne and they're murdered within like 3 weeks, and then someone else seizes the throne and is killed, etc. Great read. Glaucon, if he takes my advice, he will keep to the former life. Do you agree, then, that the women should share with the men in the way we described, in the areas of education, children, and guarding the other citizens, that whether they remain in the city or go out to war, they must guard together and hunt together, as hounds do, and share everything to the extent possible, and that, by behaving in this way, they will be doing what is best, not something contrary to the natural relationship of male to female, and the one they are most naturally fitted to share in with one another? I do agree. Then doesn't it remain for us to determine whether it is also possible among human beings, as it is among other animals, for this sort of sharing to come about, and if so, how? You took the words out of my mouth. Okay, so now he's getting on to the viability of this arrangement. I'm going to stop the video here. I think we're about halfway through Book 5. This is a real humdinger. Yeah, so we're talking about men and women here. Socrates turns out to be this amazing feminist who says that women in the ideal city should basically be allowed to do everything men do. The only provision we have to make is that, on the whole, women are weaker than men, but otherwise they can be doctors, they can be shoemakers, they can be carpenters, they can be guardians. They're treated kind of radically equal with this like unisex gymnasium. Everybody's stripping naked. Socrates doesn't care. He thinks that's, people are going to laugh about that. People probably laugh about that today while they're reading the Republic. But he says, he had this great phrase that, what was it? Laughing at the unripe fruit of wisdom. It's something to remember, I guess, or use that sometime when somebody's laughing at you. As my mother likes to say, first they laugh, then they're jealous when she comes up with some amazing technical innovation. So, yeah, he goes through and tries to prove that women shouldn't be barred from any of these offices. There's nothing essential to women that should prevent them from having any job that they want, or at least the ones that they're assigned to. And then he goes kind of after that. That's kind of the easy one. And he's like, well, here's this other thing. Like, okay, maybe you agree with that, but like, I think you're probably not gonna believe me with this other thing we have to do, which is abolish the family, have everyone's marriages arranged by the rulers, because we have this kind of eugenics program where we're like finding the best males and the best females. And that's in the case of the males, it's like whoever's best at war kind of gets rewarded. And yeah, and then he is also making all these extra rules about like finding people in their prime, and he's like defining what the prime is and saying you can't reproduce outside of the prime. And then we have this new idea of the family, which includes the entire city, essentially. So you call anyone who's born 10 months after you have sex your son or daughter, and everybody else I guess is not your son or daughter, but it ends up being you have this like very extensive immediate family, and you don't know who your biological parents are. Everything kind of takes place in this military state, which does have some benefits for people who like are trying to hold down a job and have kids. It's having sleepless nights and being worried about not producing enough milk. Socrates has a solution for you. It's like, we got this team of wet nurses taking care of everything. Like, you can focus on your job. You have you call all these kids your own. So it's like your life is kind of a lot easier. And this is kind of another solution to like helping women have it all through complete abolition of private property. So yeah, this is it's been a lot of fun. This is one of my favorite chapters just because it's so radical. Before we're like, oh, is justice helping your friends and harming your enemies? And he's like, hey, I have a crazy idea and I think it'll work. You don't really hear radical proposals like this anymore. People are more like, oh, we should change the top income tax rate to this. No one's like, hey, we should abolish the family and have everyone live in military-style mess halls, and they'll all love each other more. They won't fight as much. They'll be happier. We'll be able to like protect our nation much better that way. This is all possible. I mean, we'll see. So then the second half of the book, he's going to talk about whether it's viable or not. But we do have militaries. We do have social situations where we control every aspect of someone's life. Like, we have prisons. We have the military. Like, in prison, you do what you're told when you're told to. You're in there for years and years and years. You kind of define your own social relationships in reality. I've never been to prison, but I'm just kind of hypothesizing here. So you could do that in a different societal way and just do that for a different group of people who are your warriors, and give them their own social rules and say, like, look, you're here for life. Here are your fathers, here are your mothers, here are your sons, here are your daughters, here are the rules. Work within these rules that we've just kind of made up, but we think are for the best. So I think it's a very fascinating idea of having people participate in them. Will people take them as real? Maybe. I think he sees foremost the importance of language in helping people assimilate these kind of crazy, what we think of as crazy ideas. And again, I keep thinking back to like social media, where people sort of conflate the words with the reality of the situation. And social media has all its kind of extra rules, like, oh, you're not allowed to like this, or you're not allowed to comment on this, you have to do this in just the right way, and you got to do this, and this means that, and that means this, and this means that you have higher status than that person. People have just gotten completely sucked in, like, on the rules within their phones. Could you do sort of the same thing and just, here's a new set of rules that's different from the traditional set of rules? Maybe it's not as crazy as it sounds. I don't know. But it is a lot of fun to think about. And so hope you're enjoying it as much as I am. We'll stop the video there. Come back tomorrow. We're going to finish up book 5 and see if this crazy communist, communitarian, fascist state is actually viable, and just see where it goes. If like where do I sign up? That's what I want to know. I hope you're enjoying it. Hit subscribe if you haven't already. Hit the like button. Send the video around. Hit the share button. I don't think I've told people to do that before. And see you tomorrow.